Welcome to Chapter 10. We are now going to explore the basics of the nervous system. All right, so here's some general features of the nervous system that you want to keep in mind to help you understand as we go deeper into the nervous system. First things first, overview. So, the nervous system is one of the master regulatory systems in the body, meaning that the nervous system controls and regulates the functions of most, if not all, other systems in the body. It sends and receives information. So, um, information in the external and internal environment is picked up by parts of the nervous system. It sends that information to the central nervous system, processes that information, and then it sends that information to other cells of the nervous system and of the body. Another key feature of the nervous system is that it will detect changes in the external and internal environment. It will make decisions. So, integration and processing. It takes in the information that it's receiving, all the changes in the external and internal environment that it's receiving. It takes all the information, it processes it, and decides whether or not some action should be taken. If an action should be taken, then it decides which action it'll take. And then it sends signals to those appropriate structures, muscles, glands, etc., to actually have that action happen. And that happens through motor output. So you have sensory input, integration and processing, and then motor output. All of this is how your body maintains homeostasis. So the nervous system has function in helping you maintain balance within your body. And the central nervous system, or the nervous system in general, acts as the center for thought, learning, and memory. There are two main types of cells in your nervous system. You should recognize this from previous chapters. The two main types of cells in the nervous systems are your neurons, which are your nerve cells, and then neuroglia, which are support cells. So neurons, again, these are the actual nerves in your body. These respond quickly to changes or to stimuli. So stimulus is a change that occurs that creates some type of, oh, let me rephrase that. A stimulus is a change in the external or the internal environment. Um, and your neurons will respond quickly to that stimulus or to that change. Your neurons are the cells that actually conduct electrical impulses. So, when we talk about electrical impulses, when you talk about our bodies having electricity, that is because of the functioning of your neurons, your nerve cells. And these neurons do that through neurotransmitters. You'll remember that in the previous chapter, in the muscular system, we talked about one neurotransmitter in particular, and that was acetylcholine. The body has several different neurotransmitters. Acetylcholine is just one of those neurotransmitters that can function in the nervous system. The second type of cell of the nervous system is neuroglia. Now, neuroglia is actually a class of cells. It's not just one type of cell. Neuron is one type of cell, even though there's different types of neurons or neurons that do different things. Neuroglia is more of a class of cells where you have several different cells that have functioning in protection, support, insulation, and nourishing. All of the neuroglia function to help the neurons do their job. If you did not have neuroglia or you didn't have neuroglia that functioned properly, then your neurons would not be able to function properly because it wouldn't have the support that it needs. Neuroglia are highly important for your nervous system to work. Neuroglia does not conduct electrical impulses like your neurons, but your neurons cannot function without the protection, support, insulation, and nourishment of the neuroglia. The main flow of information. You want to keep this in mind because no matter how complex we get, no matter how complex the discussion surrounding nerve impulses get, this is the basic movement of information through your nervous system. So you have your sensory receptors throughout your body, external receptors, internal receptors. When we hear the word sensory, oftentimes we think about our special senses, sight, taste, touch, smell. But those are not the only sensory receptors that we have. Those are not the only sensory information that our nervous system processes. Nervous system also processes information about light touch versus deep touch. It um, receives information about temperature, hot temperature, cold temperature, pain, ticklish. It receives information about pH levels, calcium levels, um, pressure of within your bloodstream. All of that is information that is received by sensory receptors. The sensory receptors will look for that information. Once it receives its particular information, it'll send that sensory input. So that sensory information is being put into the central nervous system, where the central nervous system will integrate and process that information. Basically, what we mean by integration and processing is the central nervous system will take that information, translate that information so that the body can say, all right, this is information received about the temperature, about pressure, about pH. Then the central nervous system will decide, is this enough information for us to actually do anything about, or do we just sit and wait? If it decides to do something about whatever it is that is being processed, that is one option. It can actually just do nothing. If there's not enough input from the different parts of the body to warrant a reaction, then the body just won't respond until we reach that sensory threshold. Once you reach the threshold and your body decides that some action needs to happen because of the sensory information that was just put into the central nervous system, then you will have the central nervous system telling some cells, some effector cells, what to do. That is the motor output. That is the final decision of all of that information that was put in. So your motor neurons will connect to some effector and say, because of the information that we got over here, I want you to do this thing. I want you to kick, stand up, move, go to the sink, run your fingers under cold water because they got burned, shake your hand because of the pain, scream a little bit because of the pain. All of that is a part of your motor output. So, again, basic flow of information in the nervous system. You have your sensory receptors receiving information or stimulus. It takes that sensory information and brings it to the central nervous system. The brain and the spinal cord of the central nervous system will integrate and process that information. And if information or if something needs to be done, then the motor neurons will send information to the effector to tell it what to do. So, you have two main parts of your nervous system. Your nervous system is divided into two sections. You have your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is literally and figuratively in the center of your body, your brain and your spinal cord. The brain that is housed and protected in the skull, and the spinal cord that is housed in and protected by the vertebral column. That is the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is everything else. Think about the word periphery, meaning outside. Excuse me. So the peripheral nervous system is anything outside of the brain and the spinal cord. If I go back to the previous slide, this is your central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord, where you get the integration and the processing of information. And then this motor output and sensory input are all part of your peripheral nervous system. So outside of the central nervous system, we receive information, and then outside of the nervous system, well, let me rephrase that. Outside of the nervous system, we receive sensory information about changes in the external and internal environment. And then motor information has the cells outside of the central organism, I'm sorry, out of the central nervous system, moving or performing some action because of the stimulus that it got from their sensory receptors. So, peripheral nervous system connects to the central nervous system, or CNS, connects the CNS to other parts of the body. It consists of your cranial nerves and your spinal nerves. Cranial nerves are nerves that come off of the brain itself, and then spinal nerves are nerves that come off of the spinal cord. So when these nerves come off of the brain and the spinal cord, they are leaving those central nervous system structures and then going to various parts of the body to either send or receive information from the body periphery. The peripheral nervous system has those two subdivisions. You have your sensory division and your motor division. We're now going to call the sensory division afferent. So anytime you see the word afferent with respect to the nervous system, we're thinking sensory information received in the peripheral nervous system. And anytime you see efferent, you want to think motor. So that motor output from the central nervous system is going to some other cells in the body and telling those cells what to do because of the sensory or afferent information that was received. So again, two subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system, the afferent nervous system and the efferent nervous system, also known as the sensory nervous system and motor nervous system, or sensory input, motor output, respectively. So the sensory division, or the afferent division of your peripheral nervous system, you have sensory receptors that perform a sensory function. Again, these sensory receptors sense or detect changes in the environment, both inside our bodies and outside our bodies. These sensory receptors take that information from whatever sensory input it's received and changes that information into sensory impulses. Those impulses are then sent along those nerves that are a part of the peripheral nervous system. They take it from the periphery and they send it to the central nervous system so that the central nervous system can then integrate and process it. The motor division, you have neurons that transmit impulses from the central nervous system back to the periphery, specifically to effectors that are then going to perform some movement, some motor function. Effectors can be muscles or glands outside of the nervous system. And these neurons, the motor neurons, will make sure that these muscles move or the glands secrete a product in response to whatever stimulus is being received. Now, of your motor division of the peripheral nervous system, you have two more subdivisions. You have your somatic subdivision and your autonomic subdivision. The somatic subdivision transmits voluntary commands to your skeletal muscles. So somatic is voluntary And of course, we know that the voluntary portion of your body is your skeletal muscles. So the somatic division of your motor system sends signals to your skeletal muscles. The autonomic is, think about automatic. It doesn't happen with your thought process. It happens automatically. So the autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system transmits involuntary information to the viscera. Remember, the term viscera means organs. So your autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system controls the automatic movement or functioning of your organs. So, as a picture, these are the divisions of your nervous system. You have your central nervous system that composed of your brain and the spinal cord, brain and spinal cord. And then you have the nerves that come off of both the brain and the spinal cord to innervate the rest of the body. These are your peripheral nerves. So you have some of your peripheral nerves are sensory receptors. They receive information from the environment. Excuse me. It sends that afferent information to the central nervous system to be processed. And then the central nervous system processes it. If it decides to do something about it, it sends motor or efferent information or output to the rest of the effectors. Those effectors can be sent information to the somatic nervous system. That'll be your skeletal muscle. Or it can send autonomic information to smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. So, somatic nervous system will tell you to move your hand away from the fire. It might tell you to step back, so it's controlling your feet, telling your feet to move back so you can step away from the fire. Excuse me, tells your abdominal muscles to rotate so that you're turning your body away from the fire. The autonomic nervous system is telling your heart to beat faster because you're in pain. So your heart rate will increase. It has your smooth muscles will have your blood vessels contracting to have your blood moving through your body quicker. And it may tell some glands to secrete. For example, it might be your sweat glands. If it's hot or if you're in a lot of pain, your sweat glands might secrete. So all of that happens because of some stimulus. In the example that I gave, you burned your finger on a stove. Excuse me, remember that this graph is basically the same thing as the one that I showed you before, where I said that that one was the basic functioning of the nervous system. So this looks different, but it's the same thing. Sensory input going in goes to the central nervous system, and then your motor output goes out to the effectors that are going to carry out some movement. Make sure you read the information on migraines just so that you can understand clinical application of the information that we are looking at right now. Let's talk a little bit about the nervous system cells specifically. So remember, there are two different types of nervous system cells, two categories, your neurons and your neuroglia. Let's talk about the neurons. Neurons vary in size and shape. So neurons don't look exactly the same. They are, they vary depending on where they are and how they function. They may differ in their length. They may differ in the number of neurons. It may differ in the size of the number of dendrites and axons, and it may differ in the size of the axons and dendrites. So all of those are ways that your neurons may look different throughout the body depending on which neuron we're talking about and where they are. All neurons, though, share certain structural features. You have a cell body, you have a dendrite, and you have axons. So the dendrites, let's start there. The dendrites are processes that come off of the cell body, and these are parts of the neuron that actually receive information. Dendrites may receive information from receptors. They may receive information from other neurons. It may receive information from other cells. Dendrites are receiving that information. There are many dendrites for each neuron. All of those dendrites are receiving information. They send information to the cell body. The cell body is the part of the cell that contains all of the organelles. It's where the nucleus is. It's where the cytoplasm is. You have neurofilaments. So the think about neurofilaments like um, piping that is in your clothing, underwire that's in your bra, some kind of rods that hold structures together and keep their shape. Then you have your chromatophilic substances or Nissl bodies. So dendrites receive the information, it sends it through the cell body, and then eventually it sends it to the axons. Axons are the part of the neuron that sends that information to another cell. It may be another neuron, or it may be another cell in the body, gland, muscle cell, etc. So axons transmit impulses and releases neurotransmitters to another neuron or an effector. So the way that that information is transmitted, again, remember we're talking about neurotransmitters are the chemicals that are released from neurons. And those neurotransmitters help the neuron to send signals to the next cell. A neuron may only have one axon. So each neuron will typically have many, many, many different dendrites, but usually only have one axon. Axons have several different structures that you want to be aware of. You have the axon hillock, the collaterals, the axon terminal, and the synaptic knob. The axon hillock is the cone-shaped area from the cell body from which the axon arises. So as the axon leaves the cell body, it goes from wide to more narrow because it goes from the size of the cell body down to the size of the axon. That space is called the axon hillock. The collaterals, so you have one axon, but you may have branches that come off of that axon. Those are called collaterals. The axon terminal is the specialized ending of the extensions from the axon. So the axon terminal is the end part of the axon. And then the synaptic knob is that rounded end part itself of the axon terminal. All right, so axon terminal ends in the synaptic knob. Is the image on the next page? Yes. So you have many, many, many dendrites that receive information. They send that information to the cell body. That cell body then sends that information through the axon. You have the axon hillock right here, which is the portion of the axon that is leaving, that first leaves the cell body. All right, let me go back. Actually, so then you have the length of this axon, and you have some of the branches that can come off of that one axon. It leads to the synaptic knob at the axon terminal. So this is the axon. These are one of the branches of the axon. Then you have the end of each of those branches, and it ends in that synaptic knob. So now let's talk about Schwann cells. Schwann cells are one type of neuroglia of the peripheral nervous system specifically. Schwann cells wrap themselves around the axons in layers. Schwann cells wrap themselves around the axons in layers. Myelin. Myelin is a mixture of fats and proteins that are inside of the Schwann cell, um, or made by the Schwann cell membrane. So Schwann cell membrane is filled with layers of these fats and proteins. Myelin, and that's called myelin. The myelin sheath is what happens when you wrap the Schwann cells around the axons in the peripheral nervous system. These act like an insulator. So when I go back to this image, you see these yellow objects that are wrapped around these Schwann cells. This yellow object, I'm sorry, wrapped around the axon of the neuron. These yellow objects are the Schwann cells that are wrapped around the axon. It is the myelin of the Schwann cell that is wrapped around the axons in basically in layers. So these are the Schwann cells, these made up of myelin sheath that surrounds and protects these axons. Now you notice that there's a Schwann cell, there's a space, Schwann cell, space, etc. The spaces in between the Schwann cells are called the nodes of Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier. So, nodes of Ranvier, gaps in the myelin sheets between Schwann cells. All right, so there's that. So again, you have your neuron dendrites receiving information, sending it to the axon, I'm sorry, the cell body. The cell body then sends it through the axon hillock into the axon. Each axon is surrounded by Schwann. Each axon in the peripheral nervous system is surrounded by Schwann cells. The Schwann cells are made up of myelin. These sheets of myelin will wrap around the axon in layers, protecting and insulating the axon. We will stop there for now. This is the end of video 1 for the Nervous System Basics, Chapter 10.